Okay, so hi everyone. Hello. Welcome to the first session of our Triple E's webinar series. So my name is Leila Cantat, and I'm going to be your moderator tonight. I am also the co-founder of Black Eco Bloom. So Black Eco Bloom is the organization planning this tonight. So we're really excited to provide this space for this discussion to happen. I'm so eager and excited to hear from all of you. So yeah, let's jump right into it. So maybe we can go to the next slide. Perfect. So I'll take this opportunity, as I have a few people here, to talk a little bit about Black Eco Bloom. But it's going to be very quickly because my focus it's really our panelists tonight. So quickly, Black Eco Bloom, it's a sustainable development organization. And what we really wanted is to create something that can support Black communities, people from the African diaspora, in their journey in the environmental sector with climate change. And the approach that we choose to do it is with the intersectional lens by uplifting, putting forward, supporting Black women in the environmental sector. So I put a few pictures in there. Those are like, I guess, pictures from our journey, I could say. So from the far left, you have it's cropped a little bit, unfortunately, but like there's a picture of Tiana and I. So Tiana is the co-founder, the other co-founder of Black Eco Bloom. So this picture actually was on the day we launched Black Eco Bloom, and we were at the Just Transition seminar, and we were so excited to make our first connection and just be like, hey, we're launching today. This is Black Eco Bloom. So this is like a cute memory of that. Far right, it's the first time we hosted an in-person session with BIPOC youth in Montreal. And it was just like a space, like we gathered a few youth to talk about intersectionality, climate justice, what does it mean for them, what is their journey in the environmental sector, how are they navigating that. So that was the first time we did that, and it was really fun. We're really proud of this first step. And I guess like this picture where you see many people in it, so that is the first roundtable that we hosted this year at COP27. So it was a roundtable all about building international solidarity among Black communities in the environmental sector. So that was really a big step for us. We're really proud of that one as well. And so this is a little bit about Black Eco Bloom. Hopefully we'll get to do more events and share more with you and just continue to grow and do the impact that we really want to do. So yeah, we can go to the next slide. So today we'll start the session with a land acknowledgement. So I'm going to read it for you. So it's, just give me 1 second here. Okay, so let's start with the land acknowledgement. So we wish to acknowledge the many diverse Indigenous nations and peoples whose land BEB's team members are joining from, including the lands of the Wendat, Anishinaabe, Mississauga of the Credit, and the Haudenosaunee, currently called Toronto, the Blackfoot Confederacy, Sissiska, Kaina, Piikani, and Tsuut'ina and Iyashe, Nakota nations, the Métis Nation, Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta, currently called Calgary, and the unceded Indigenous land of Kiniake Mohawk Nation. BEB respects and affirms the inherent and treaty rights of all Indigenous people across this land, and we encourage you to support Indigenous peoples and communities everywhere. We also acknowledge the many Black and of African descent who are not settlers, but whose ancestors were forcibly displaced as part of this transatlantic slave trade against their will and made to work on these lands. We honor and pay tributes to all ancestors of African origin and descent. Thank you. Okay, so let's move with event guidelines. So quickly, this is a webinar format. So when you want to ask a question, you can use the chat feature. We ask you obviously to be respectful. We want this place to be a safe space. We want our panelists to share as comfortably that you want to do so. So please be respectful. And Obviously, keep yourself muted unless you're speaking or engaging in a conversation, just to help reducing the background noises. Oh, wow, right into it. Okay, so we will start. We're just gonna jump into it. We're gonna start with our panelists. So before I do so, I just really, really want to thank you all for being here, agreeing to be part of this panel. You guys were also enthusiastic into taking part of this, so it means a lot to us, and we're really appreciative to have you here, to hear from you, but also learn from you. So we will start with Arielle King. So Arielle King is an environmental educator, facilitator, and writer, content creator. So Arielle, I don't know if you would like to introduce yourself quickly.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Arielle King. I'm 24 years old. I have a background in environmental law and policy. Currently based in the Washington, D.C. area. I work with two organizations in the U.S. One is Intersectional Environmentalist. The other is Black Girl Environmentalist. I'm the host of a podcast called The Joy Report. And yeah, I'm very excited to be a part of this conversation today.
Thank you so much, Arielle. Thank you for being here. We can go to our next panelist. Okay, so we have Beatrice Anane Bidioko with us. So Beatrice is a doctoral candidate in the Department of Sociology at York University. She holds a Master of Education in Humanities, Social Science, and Social Justice Education from the University of Toronto. So Beatrice, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. So yes, I'm Beatrice Anane Bidiakun. I'm a sociologist who explores the relationship between race and geographical space and how those two intersections inform Black personhood and Black residents. I'm also a sister, I'm a mentor, I'm a friend, and so much more. But I'm super grateful to be here, and I'm excited to share this space with you folks. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Beatrice. So we will go with our next panelist, which is Kiana Bonik. So Kiana is currently a climate change consultant at SSG. She's a director of operations at Women of Color Durham Collective and was a founding member of Black Environmentalist Alliance.
Hey folks, my name is Kiana. I'm joining you just from outside of Toronto. As shared, I am a climate change consultant, but I'm also a variety of hats depending on where I am. But most of my background is around community development, international development, and just honestly connecting everything, understanding different connections to the environment itself. I'll say my experience is not linear, and I think most of us here probably isn't either, but I've done probably things that are related to climate change and things that you probably don't think they are. So yeah, excited to just see everyone here today.
That was so exciting. She kind of like give you a tip of something, and now we're just excited to hear more about all of this different experience. So our fourth panelist is Tamara Little. So Tamara is a Jamaican young professional with 4 years experience in the built environment space with interest in urban planning and utilization of GIS.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm Jamaican. I have a Bachelor of Science in Geography, so environment has been a part of me from a very early stage. I chose to specialize in the built environment. I have worked in disaster risk management agencies, planning agencies, currently in the utilities sector as a GIS professional. So I still have to bring all of that knowledge into my work, even though it's very electricity based, but it's still interesting, and I hope to pass on some information to you guys.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Okay, so now we're back in big screen so we can see all of you. Okay, so then I guess we can start with our first question. Just to explain quickly the format. So like the first 3 questions, I'm gonna ask them and invite whoever wants to answer it and wants to share something about that. So the first question is, what drew you to exploring the environmental sector or incorporating the environment either as a career or as a field of study? So go ahead. I don't know who wants to go first.
I can hop in if you'd like.
course.
So my introduction to incorporating the environment or this into my field of study was actually an accident. So I initially enrolled in the PhD sociology program at York University to explore Black and Indigenous expulsion from the Canadian imagination. So I spent a lot of my time critiquing neoliberalism, the fictive construction of the nation state, and disposability politics. But it wasn't until my second semester of my coursework where I was kind of introduced to human geography, right? And the environment, which was through Shireen Razak. I don't know if folks are familiar, but her text called Race, Space, and the Law, Unmapping a White Settler Society. And I realized through this text that it kind of like changed the trajectory of my research, right? So in this text, she talks a lot about place, right? And she talks about it in reference to geographical space and the way that place is raced through laws, right? So how the state organizes space to sustain unequal social relations and how these relations reproduce racial hierarchies, right? And how these hierarchies are needed to maintain a white settler society. So then this kind of moved me to look at Black geographies in Canada. And this is where I rediscovered Africville. And I don't know if folks are familiar with Africville, but it was a town in Nova Scotia where, well, it currently is still a town in Nova Scotia, but the state in essence induced illness onto Africville, right? By denying the community of essential services, which then further justified the denial of essential services, right? So in the mind of the public, it was constructed as a space of degeneracy, of filth, of a slum. And then you continue to see this in Black communities today, where Black communities have become sacrificial zones, right? Where you have Black communities in industrial air polluted spaces. So then this kind of had me think about my own experiences, right? Where I lived in the past, I spent half of my life living in a space that was called a priority neighborhood. And this neighborhood is constructed as a space which is high crime, low access to employment, low public services. In essence, it was an underserved community. So through my research, some of the things that I realized was that space and geographies aren't neutral, they're not innocent, right? When you think about the slum, when you think about wealthy spaces, they don't naturally evolve in that format, right? They're engineered and they're curated to look that specific way. And that's connected obviously to capitalism, to colonialism. I also realized that space is raced and it's classed, right? And this is a product of these unequal social relations. And I also realized that specifically for Black people in Canada, there's this narrative that Blackness is ungeographic, right? Or it doesn't have historical ties to the land. So this in itself brings up the process of racialization when we're talking about geography. And then the last bit I realized is that the ways in which space is represented is connected to people's sense of self. It's connected to their personhood, which I think is oftentimes overlooked. It's oftentimes minimized when we talk about the well-being of Black people, when we talk about what it looks like to have a place in this world. So with all that kind of experience, my research then is kind of interdisciplinary. So I do take from human geography, I take from sociology, I take from Black studies. And what I do is I interconnect these to look at the ways in which Black residents resist these constructions of their geographies and how they reclaim Black life in these spaces, from in these spaces and outside of these spaces. So that's kind of how I enter, if that makes sense. Hopefully that was clear.
That was more than clear, and that was beautifully said. And you brought up such important concepts. So thank you so much, Beatrice. That was great. So I'm just gonna go ahead. I'm gonna repeat the question, and if anyone wants to jump in. So what drew you to exploring the environmental sector or incorporating the environment either as a career or as a field of study?
I can go next. And I just absolutely love sharing space with Black geographers. It's like my favorite thing in the world, just because there's obviously so much history and just there's such a great legacy of us being in this space, but also just like interacting with our planet. And so I don't know, one, that's what really like drew me to the space of environmentalism. Like, I feel like I've always been interested in environmentalism and saving the planet. Pretty much like the first time I heard of the term global warming, it was like, oh, we gotta fix this one. Like, this is not okay. And I felt like the more I learned about inequities in environmental protection and access, the more I felt called to commit myself to that work. And so it wasn't really until college that I learned about the terms environmental justice, or the idea of political ecology, or just like the understanding that our relationships to the land and to the environment are dictated by history, culture, and the ways that we interact with those things through environmental governance. So that's kind of what introduced me to environmental law and the need to pursue environmental law as a field of study. And I think my overarching goal in this space is to help create self-determination for communities that have been most adversely impacted by environmental harm and who are continually impacted by the climate crisis. I believe that if we are not educating people, they will not be adequately involved and engaged in decisions that are being made about their communities. In the environmental legal space, this looks like making space for community discussion and seeking community input prior to the development of law and policy, which makes it more inclusive, more holistic generally. And yeah, that's kind of how I've entered this space. And I feel just so deeply connected to like allowing people to regain their connections to the land. I think as environmental advocates, it's our job to develop our own kind of eco autobiography, which is a term that Melanie Harris came up with, or just like our historical and ancestral familial connections to the land and to place, for us to help develop our why. And so, yeah, that's something that I hope that I can help more people do in this space.
Thank you so much, Arielle. So this eco-autobiography key term that you're mentioning, you have to send it to us and with the reference so we can use that in our work and also share it with our followers. So please, all of these little keywords, send them our ways. That was great. Thank you so much, Arielle. I don't know if there's someone else who would like to say something. Yes, Tamara, of course, go ahead.
What drew me into incorporating environment in my studies and in my work, I was introduced to geography in high school. And to be honest, at that time in Jamaica, geography is not something that you hear a lot of people speak about. You don't see it being applied in professions. And I pursued it up until in college. And then that's when through internships, I gained an interest in urban planning and disaster risk management, and understanding that how we interact with our environment definitely impacts our development, because Jamaica as a seed, small island developing state, we are just so prone to any negative shock that happens in the world. Climate change, economic shock, COVID-19, and trust me, anything that's happening in the world is amplified in Jamaica times 10. And I recognize that in the planning space, we can use concepts of the environment to use the environment better. So for instance, we have issues where Jamaicans, unfortunately, we have a dumping issue. We need to advocate more, explain to Jamaicans why when you dump in the gully, it blocks up the Kingston Harbor, it kills the corals in the harbor. We also have a serious air pollution issue where, because of lack of state resources in regards to waste management, most Jamaicans resort to burning, and as a result, there is a high incidence of asthma in Jamaica. Our main dumps are all in the central business districts throughout the island. And for example, our main dump that is in Riverton City, in the Kingston and St. Andrew area, whenever that dump is on fire, at least 4 parishes choke. And we need to, and I find that we don't have enough voices in the space to explain to the common man in Jamaica that when you burn garbage, yes, you're trying to solve an issue, but those particulate matter that you release into the air not only hurts you, but it hurts a lot of people and several people several miles away. So I find that because and as someone who suffers from severe asthma, I find that I have to really be explaining to people that you can't do this, you can't do that. And I see planning and GIS as a way for me to put my foot in the door and really see how I can change that narrative. So yes, that's how I got interested and trying to do something about it.
Thank you so much, Tamara. That was great. I love how what you were going through really shaped your work. I'm sure you're gonna have more to share later. So I don't know if anyone else would like to say something about that. Oh,
Yeah,
Kiana, you unmute.
oh,
Mhm.
okay, awesome. So I guess what drew me to the environmental sector is a good question, because honestly, I have to think about the point where I choose officially to join it. I think throughout growing up or just throughout school, whether it be just like my family does gardening, and I'm thinking of, for example, my grandfather. When they came here, they had a backyard. And at a kid that it seems huge for a 5 to 8 year old, probably seems huge, but it probably was smaller what it is. But I was always just learning about growing food and taking things from your garden to cook. And as a practice, because my grandfather was a farmer back home, and my family is from Jamaica. But it's kind of that practice throughout growing up. But also just, yeah, volunteering different environmental practices, but it's not until officially until later in high school or early in university where I'm hearing terms like environmental racism, or just also trying to figure out, as someone who's always a very hard science student, who's also dabbling in the social sciences, trying to figure out where do these two come together. And I found environmental sector was that. Allow me to play around with different disciplines versus trying to be hard science or hard social studies, and really understand and hear different stories and how that relates to environment itself. So yeah, I think that's how it kind of, I fell into the sector. I was originally supposed to be a biotechnologist, and I found that boring because I didn't want to be in a lab all day. And I really just missing engagement with people. So yeah, that's my experience.
Thank you so much, Kiana. Okay, that was interesting to see like the shift. Well, the movement is really lucky to have you. So I guess we can go to our next question. So a bit of resources. So what are some resources you would recommend to those exploring an education in the environmental space?
One, I just want to like really emphasize the value of reading books. I think like reading books just like opens your eyes to nuance and allows you to create your own like philosophy. And so, yeah, books are really important to me. And I think books allow for the legacies of Black women, especially in the environmental space, to be, fulfilled in like very, very beautiful ways. So over the last few months, I've been like curating a list of books that have like helped me in my journey to understanding environmental justice and Black liberation and ecofeminism and all of this stuff. And so I'll share a link to that. But yeah, that's a resource. I also think social media can be a really beneficial resource to learn more from people and also connect with people and experts in this field. It's always just interesting to see what people are up to and what they're sharing. So I think those would be my two resources to share.
I could, oh, sorry, did you want to go? I was just going to piggyback off of that. I think that finding reading lists on Google is really helpful. I actually did it myself. I was looking for Black geographers who do work globally, and I actually came across the Black Geography's American Association specialty group. And literally on their website, they have a plethora of reading lists. They have books, they have articles, they have video clips that I found super helpful. I mean, they're exhaustive. Like I can't go through all of them, but that's really helpful. Just Googling things that you folks are interested in. I would also suggest researching different faculties of geography if folks are interested in that in your neighboring institutions. Look up professors and the work that they do. I don't know if folks look at the citations at the end of journal articles. I know that during my undergrad, I didn't even print them out, but they're actually so useful. Like you get to see who these authors or these professors are citing, right? That can also expand your learning around that. And then if you want, you can reach out to these professors. Like, yes, professors or faculty are busy, but they also love being admired for their intellectual work. So milk that, right? So send them an email with your clear intention saying like, this is the purpose of the email, and then maybe highlight 3 questions and like, they will get back to you. And then I guess the last thing would be attending academic talks or community initiatives. I know not everyone's plugged in, but like Eventbrite, I don't know if folks are familiar with that. It's like a platform where they host, or it's a platform that has different events on there. You can use that to look up any community events that are occurring in your local area and so forth. But yeah, that's what I would recommend.
I don't know if anyone want to share something, but I feel like what just happened was amazing. Between your reading list, Arielle, which is so generous of you to share, and all of your tips, Beatrice, like this call is already worth it. Like that's it, we did it. that was really good. Thank you so much for these tips and for being so generous. That's amazing. Well, Kiana, you want to add something?
Yeah, honestly, people. I think having the ability to be in different spaces and just to talk about people at different perspectives around even environment itself, or even having different experiences. A lot of my experiences come from volunteering, to be honest, or doing things that are not even related to environment, but understanding, being in that space and having a context of how this relate back to environment and climate change issues. So things of such as, for example, I was part of the Youth Advisory Council for the Toronto Pan Am Games. Sports focus, not focusing on environment whatsoever. When we're looking at the relation between sport, community development, and even space, and how people engage with the space itself, that taking that experience allows me to, again, when I'm going to a client or a particular space, I can speak from that experience itself. And it also helps to tailor my own education when I was figuring out what's my next step. And just talking to people, because it's just bringing in different perspectives. So honestly, it's like just one, volunteering, find those experiences and being open to experiences that may not be related, but might be something of interest. Because at the end of the day, the environment impacts everything and everything impacts the environment. So the question is just finding your niche and just asking a lot of questions and figure out what if you're going through traditional academic university or college-based education, also looking at how what is the limitations to your program? And what I mean by that is I was in a degree where I could take literally geography, urban planning, biology. That allowed me to really explore, but I also could take courses in a different school. So that exploration or that opportunity to explore and that flexibility helped me to really understand, again, getting different perspectives around climate change versus just a strictly science perspective or just strictly social sciences perspective, but understand how they interact.
And I'd like to add my resource. To be honest, I'm addicted to YouTube. So I would literally go on YouTube and be like, day in the life of a GIS person, day in the life of an urban planner. And I'd watch their videos and I'd hear the things that they speak about. And I'd be like, oh my God, that sounds interesting. Let me Google their program and then I'll read it up and say, okay, do I want to pursue this? But that is my resource, to be honest.
That's a good one.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I just want to take a few seconds to just commend you all again, because in the chat, people are just, thank you all for being here. I feel like people are really grateful for you and sharing all of these resources and experience. So before we pursue, I just want to say thank you again, because people are, I feel like they want to say that in the chat. That's what the love we are getting in the chat. Well, okay, amazing. So we can go to our third question. So that's the last general question. And then after that, we're gonna go towards more like targeted questions. So the last question last general question is, what advice would you all provide in terms of choosing an area of study?
I guess I could start. In terms of choosing an area of study, when I started geography in in university, my whole aim was to be a biogeographer. Did I really understand what a biogeographer was at the time? No, I did not. It was only when I started to go through the various programs throughout my university career that I saw that, okay, I'm not so great at the physical geography. Geomorphology is stressing me out. And then I realized that I really aligned to planning and GIS. And to be honest, those were some of my better grades as well. And I was more excited to read the literature. I was more excited to speak to the lecturer after class. And I realized that if it is that this area makes me so excited right now in university, which is one of the most trying times of my life, imagine how much more exciting it could be when I'm getting paid to do it. So I definitely use that and then I also chose a lot of internships during that time that focused on GIS and urban planning. So that really helped me to say, okay, this is what I want to focus on. And I can say right now that I made a great choice because I love what I do.
If I could just ask a quick follow-up question to that, Tamara, would you mind just giving us a brief overview? What is GIS work and what does it look like?
Okay, so for clarity, GIS stands for Geographic Information Systems. It is a software where you can incorporate data sets to interrogate the world in a spatial format. So you can solve everyday issues using spatial technologies. So for instance, when I was at ODPEM, which is the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management in Jamaica, we would do things called hazard vulnerability assessments, where we would look at data that would have past hazard information. So for example, we could have a point shapefile that refers to past epicenters of earthquakes. We could have another shapefile that demonstrates how far a flooding event occurred, and then we could overlay that with the area to say, all right, this is what this area is prone to. You can also build models as well. Right now, when I was doing urban planning, we would also map, for example, construction permits to determine construction patterns in Jamaica to say, okay, this area has a higher rate of permits being approved. What is going on here? Why are people being driven to this area? Because when I created that map, I could do that analysis and present to the minister and say, okay, Maypen has seen an increase in construction permits. Maypen doesn't have the infrastructure to support the amount of people that are going there. What can we do now to ensure that whoever's going to Maypen can have a good quality of life? Now, as a GIS professional, an example is that for Jamaica is a very, I would say, we have various vegetation. So you have bamboo, forests, flatlands, and our main lines, which we refer to as feeders, have to pass through a lot of that different type of vegetation. So for instance, a feeder that passes through a dense foliage is going to be less reliable than a feeder that passes through an urban area. So then we can do the analysis to say, okay, this feeder needs more maintenance over this period of time. Then we can look at the type of maintenance activity. For example, like bamboo, we have a lot of areas where high rainfall bamboo grows a lot. However, due to environmental issues, you can't just use any type of chemical because you don't want that to affect the watershed because we depend on our watershed for our rainfall. So then we would know that, okay, for example, Rock Hall St. Andrew, you're gonna have to send a crew out there every 3 months to do some cutting because that bamboo is gonna grow seriously fast. So GIS helps in so many ways. I wish my country would use it more, but slowly but surely.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much, Tamara. We have Juliet in the chat. Hello, Juliet. We have Juliet in the chat that are saying, well done to you, because she knows that it's not easy. So good. I don't know if someone else wanted to answer the question.
I could hop in. In terms of choosing a study, I think that, well, I would suggest pursuing an area that piques your interest, an area that you can spend hours talking about, because it takes a lot from you. and an area that speaks to your lived experience, right? Because I think that your work will come out naturally if you're connected to it intimately. But even with all that, I think being open to different knowledges can also help to facilitate your interest to study. Because like I said earlier, when I went into the program, I didn't think of incorporating geography in any capacity in my work. But I think the fact that I was open about it brought me to where I am today. So yeah, that's what I would suggest.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think I would also encourage people to stay true to their why, even when others question it. And it's so easy to do when it's connected to, you know, something that's like very deep inside of you. I remember so vividly when I started my undergrad program in 2014 in environmental studies, everyone was like, why are you doing that? Like, you're not going to get a job in environmental studies. And then when I started law school, everyone's like, why do you want to focus on environmental justice? Like, what are you doing? Literally, the president of my law school at the time told me, like, we are only going to support things that are going to bring our students jobs. Are there jobs in environmental justice? And like, you know, it's crazy. Like, I can laugh about it now, but like, as a student, it was like very disheartening and like frustrating to be a part of an institution or multiple institutions that truly just didn't understand the value in pursuing this area of study. And I had, you know, family members and, you know, all this stuff also just questioning this, but I remained true to it because this was deeply connected to something I was passionate about. And I guess that also ties to another like recommendation. And it would really be to find something that aligns with your passion, but isn't directly your passion, right? Because a job might not be forever, but your passion can be. And so like, if you are actively pursuing an area of study with the goal or intention of having a specific job, it might limit your opportunities. I know when I started in law school, there was no such thing as an environmental justice staff attorney, but that was my first job out of law school. So like the career space ebbs and flows, but again, like staying driven and grounded in your why will help you and definitely will sustain you when things get really hard and really difficult. And I feel like your space in any movement is really at the intersection of what you're good at, what problems need to be fixed, and like what and how you would like to contribute to that movement. So, I mean, and that can look in so many different ways and that can evolve throughout your life, but really just like continuously doing those check-ins is going to be helpful for yourself.
And I'll quickly jump in, and I'm echoing what has been said already, but I think that's to add on to Arielle's point. And great, you mentioned like it's a lot of people are like, why are you doing this? Is it going to relate into a job? And I think and I remember a mentor of mine said that even the field that we're in is fairly young. That means to a certain extent, you'll be creating your own role. And that's how I've been operating, to be honest, when I've gone to even study and just asking questions, but also recognizing that this is the first, I might be saying terms and things that is the first time someone's trying to figure out how is this relating to what I do. So it's learning how to even word things and understand perspectives and saying, this is how it's relating back to you, and this is why I need to be in your class, or why I would like to be in your class. And that's honestly, it's not the easiest path, but while and there's not really a clear path of what is coming up next, I think there's something nice about also going an unpaved path and to create and tailor it to yourself, because the sector is so unique and it's so broad and there's so much opportunity. But you can curate it to how you want to because it's so new. So it's like a double-edged sword. It's on one end, there's not a clear, oh, you know, you're going to this direction afterwards. But at the same time, you can curate it to what you want based on what you're interested in and your skills.
Thank you so much. Yes, Arielle just said that possibilities are endless, and yeah, they are. All of the nuances are almost endless. So, right, the paths can be as well. Well, I think that's a good segue to your next questions, which are more like targeted. So I have a question for each one of you. So that's going to give you the opportunity to share a bit more about your work and your journey, let's say, and your personal experience. So we can start with Beatrice and Arielle. So Could you speak a bit more to your perspective on how intersectional identities inform the educational field that you choose to pursue? So I don't know if you want to start. Okay.
I could. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I think that my intersectional identity is what makes my contributions to this space so valuable and so rich, right? I think, I'm a Black woman working in this space, but I grew up in a lower middle class family in upstate New York. I'm a first generation college and law school graduate. I do believe that like every single part of my identity, separate and combined, contributes to a very unique experience in the environmental space, recognizing that in like the mainstream environmental movement doesn't center the views and the knowledge and the contributions or the lived experience of Black and Brown people, even though like we have actively contributed to this space for years and years and generations. And we have actively contributed to the like environmental and climate discourse, even like within academia for decades now. And we are the blueprint for sustainability. And so there's a whole lot that the mainstream environmental movement can and should be learning from us. And I think that it is our obligation or our duty as Black women, like taking up space in the environmental sector, to remind people of that and to bring ourselves and not like try to hide ourselves behind like respectability politics or like code switching, like to allow like, I don't know, just the fullness of who we are to come about and contribute meaningfully to this space. I think about, the term intersectionality and the way that Kimberly Crenshaw like talks about it. And she's, she coined this term in order to speak to the multiple social forces and social identities and ideological instruments, which essentially power and disadvantage how different people's experiences are shaped within multiple forms of oppression or disadvantage. So like thinking about the way that as Black people, our like relationship to the land is very different, because especially Black Americans or Black people in Canada, like we came here not by choice, so many of us, and our relationships to the land, like there is generational healing that needs to happen in us in order for us to have a full like relationship to the land. And then there's also just all of these layers and barriers of, institutional racism, the legacy of the Jim Crow movement, the way that environmental racism and like capitalism and all of these things like come together to hinder our ability to live fully with the land and, in a certain place, and how climate change is actively displacing our people. Like there are just so many elements of intersectionality that have to be considered in order for us to create the viable, I guess, like whole and inclusive environmental future that we need and that we all deserve.
I love that. That was so beautifully said. I love it. I'm just echoing that. I think like my intersectional identity as cisgendered, able-bodied Black woman of working diasporic parents, I think it completely informs my educational field of choice, right? I've always been fascinated by the puzzle of the social world and the intricate webs of social relations. I think my life experiences that I operate through, like my body that I operate through, has colored the way that I see the world and also the way in which the world sees me. Oppression, which I continue to face, I feel has always been ever present for me, specifically when I lived in my previous neighborhood and the school that I attended. By like grade 3, I was labeled a problem child, right? Badly needing counseling intervention. And this was a result of my social identity, right? The intersection of being Black, being a girl, being poor. But I think that my parents' drive for success and their privilege of being English speaking, of being cisgendered, neurotypical, able-bodied, equipped them, right? It gave them the tools to move out of a neighborhood into a space that removed them from poverty, right? And into a suburb and into a property ownership space that kind of reconfigured the way they seen themselves, which also impacted the way I see myself, right? I then had to search for language to best understand my experience, right? As being privileged, but also being marginalized in very specific ways because of my intersectional identity. And then I bumped into sociology in high school, right? And this gave me this like language to make sense of this new shift in my life. And for those who aren't familiar with sociology, it's basically looking at human interactions and in society and the consciousness that realizes that we shape the world and also the world shapes us, right? Institutions and culture shapes us. So recognizing that kind of impacted my understanding of like systemic violence, racism. And then I made it my issue because of my lived experience to undermine and carve out spaces for Black lives to thrive in academia, right? It's a space that's typically renders Black people as ungeographic, right? We're not supposed to be in these spaces, right? To carve out spaces for us to exist in them. So ever since, my work's been motivated by this commitment to this collective struggle for Black freedoms, Black life forms in all capacities. And what I want us to remember is that we don't ever come to our work without our identities, right? In whatever capacity it is, if you're in school, if you're not in school, we don't move in spaces without it. They follow us, right? So, and they're shaped by our experiences. So I think that in this case, personally, it shapes the way I conduct research. It shapes the way I engage with my research participants, how I write, and so forth. So yeah, no, it follows me. I can't leave it behind, but I embrace it as well.
Thank you so much. These two interventions were that was both beautifully said. Well, thank you. I guess I don't know if anyone would like to add something. I know the question was for Arielle and Beatrice, but I don't know if Kiana or Tamara, if you would have something to share about that. No pressure, but no. Okay. Okay, so then we can go to our next question. So this next question is for Arielle and Kiana. So much of your work is centered around environmental storytelling and communications, right? So how do you incorporate that throughout your educational journey, and how do you continue to do so?
I can start. So how I speak about how I incorporate throughout my educational journey. I think there's always the saying my mom always says, sometimes it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And when you're thinking about, again, environmental sector, the understanding of how one defines environmental sector within this context, or even climate change, it's always very technical first. And even when I used to be on campus and working at sustainability office, a lot of times you'll say, I go to management students, I'm not a science student, I don't know what this is about, I'm not involved. And it's because one, folks didn't see themselves in it because of how this is always generally environment is generally communicated. Two, it's very technocratic. It's only seeing data and science as one form of knowledge versus recognizing there's a whole other form of knowledge that is on equal ground. And it tells the other half of that story that I think data can only tell so much of. So how do people experience environment or climate change? And folks are saying that in their own terms, in their own ways, and for their own experiences. So folks will be talking about things they've noticed, like, for example, I've noticed like when I go fishing, X species are no longer here, or I've noticed that this tree has changed, or like these little subtle things that folks notice, or they engage with day to day. Are they using your technical biology, ecology language? No, but they're actually saying the exact same thing. So it's a question of, one, how do you take that and honor that in a way that's intentional and not just saying, oh, it's just local knowledge. No, it's just a different form of knowledge and it's just as important. And applying that, I do that in my work, but even throughout my studies, there's just, again, listening to folks about how you understand and how they view what they're experiencing, whether it be the built environment or quote unquote the natural environment. And I'm speaking from experience of where I had the opportunity to work with the UN And I was out in Indonesia and I had an opportunity to go out in the field and was asking folks about, okay, basically this climate change program is doing what it needs to do. And I was talking to a community, I was invited into a community of sea nomads. So essentially these are folks who live on the sea, they have no allegiance to any country, but they're slowly starting to stay stationary in some parts of Indonesia. And when you ask or talk to about, okay, what do you notice? The first thing they're talking about is how their everyday experiences are changing because of climate change. And as we're talking, you can automatically attach it to what the science side, what ways of how the science would describe that. But it's at the same time, it's just, again, understanding how people relay this information and even how you communicate that. Again, writing articles where it's not a bunch of science jargon, but also how is that relatable to me walking to my grocery store? How is that relatable to the person who connect with down the street? Me telling you a bunch of technical terms is not going to help. You'd be like, okay, that's cool, but how does that do with anything with me? And I think that alone, if you forget about the communication and the story aspect of the sector itself, and really recognizing the value of the knowledge that people already hold and understand about climate change. There's practices that again, as already said, there's practices that we've been doing from time. And sometimes we need to bring up in certain spaces of something brand new is like, okay, my grandma's doing this from day one. This is nothing new. She just called it something else. I think that's how I've seen that language, and sometimes calling it out. And so other times it's just also just ensuring that is showed up in the work that I've done or through my education in various ways.
Exactly. That's exactly right. I think such an important part of storytelling is creating an avenue to validate the lived experience of people, right? And like giving credit and honor to knowledge, that might not be or derive from, technical institutions or from degrees or whatever. I think that, it humanizes crises. And I think that storytelling allows people to have a greater understanding of the full impact of an event. I think about, I was studying the Flint water crisis during for my senior thesis in undergrad. And I think one of the things that made the Flint water crisis stand out from so many others were the very easily identifiable characters or just people who actively contributed to bringing the crisis to life and bringing attention to the crisis. Like, for example, Little Miss Flint, or like the doctor who brought attention to all of these common symptoms that young people were experiencing, or the mother who brought this issue to national attention. Yeah, there were just very identifiable people and stories that contributed to this crisis becoming mainstream and getting everyone to get involved. I also think that storytelling has so much value in law and policy. Once I started law school, I realized that, if you aren't incorporating storytelling into law and policy, then you are completely missing out. One of my first internships was at a lobbying firm in New York State. And one of my first assignments was to write memos on the benefits of mixed martial arts, which now is oh, that's very random. But the storytelling was really what sold it to the legislators. I wrote these memos from the perspective of multiple people who would benefit from this industry being legalized. And so, and as we were, a group of students and I were working on the development of this full curriculum, where we were going around and collecting information and data from residents who were experiencing environmental injustice across the state of Vermont while I was in law school. One, we compensated people for the time that they shared and the expertise that they were sharing with us. And two, we made sure that they were involved in the decision-making process and in the lawmaking process. And, we used what they told us to influence the way that law and policy was created. And so, yeah, there's obviously so many benefits to storytelling, but I think in just communicating complex issues, and validating lived experiences, those are probably the top benefits in the environmental space.
Thank you so much for answering this. I have just a quick question for you, and Jess can answer it very quickly. But I feel like the more I meeting people, I feel like everyone has like the different approach in doing storytelling, and it's so powerful. And I get that. So what is your, if you want to share, maybe your strategy into building a good storytelling? How do you build momentum? How do you, like your message, you make sure that people are listening to your message? If there is something specific that you do and you would like to share.
Yeah, for me, it's really objective specific. Like if I want if I am making sure that like a legislator, for example, knows that something needs to be incorporated into law and policy, I'm going to do my best to represent the views and stories of people who might not be able to be in that room. And so that requires a lot of, on the back end, listening to people, asking questions, people who've been impacted by environmental harm, just really centering and amplifying their stories, and just being honestly just a conduit, just a bridge to create access to those stories to the people who need to hear them. And so that's definitely one method, and I'm sure panelists can also speak to this, so I won't take up too much space.
I guess, yeah, it really depends. In some spaces, it's through art. In other spaces, it could be just, again, I was sharing, as saying, is listening to folks. As Arielle was also assuming too, like, it's listening to people and having, because you're able to access certain spaces, bring what you're hearing into these spaces and relaying that information. Also, it's just, honestly, it's keeping it very simple and relatable. I had a job where I was literally teaching young children, so ages like 6 to 10, about disaster risk management. And that's it's a huge topic itself. But to always think about, okay, how would I explain it to this particular audience in a way that they can relate to? And they did. It was very interesting to hear the conversations or experiences they had around disaster and who's prepared and their family, and just providing that different, again, how people relate to that. It might be visual, it might be auditory, it might just sometimes just literally just listening. So it really depends on the role and the place in the space and the intention that one aims to get out in terms of storytelling, but also really staying true to the storyteller. And recognizing that, again, storytelling is an art that's been done through centuries. It's not thing new. It's just maybe the methods that we're using or the media or the way we're doing it is slightly different, but we all have the ability to do it. It's just learning how and practicing that. And part of that, again, is just listening to other storytellers who I look up to. I just kind of also throw ideas at, and they'll come back with a different story and how that connects to something else.
And could I add, well, in regards to the storytelling, I'm so encouraged and I feel so much better hearing this from you guys, because I have a Instagram page that is a shell of itself. I call it the Urban Jamaican. And I wanted to use that medium as a place to express how the urban environment in Jamaica has developed. And I found that because I didn't have those storytelling skills, I got so afraid and I left the page alone, because I was like, I don't want to talk about land degradation. And then people are like, what is this girl talking about? It's so complex. I didn't want to just to appeal to a technocrat who already knows this. I wanted my page, the common person to see my page and be like, oh, this is interesting. And I found that I kind of lack those storytelling skills. I really appreciate that discussion, because now I know that I have to relate it and break it down and just put it out there and hope that people will see it and engage with it. Thank you very much, guys.
Yes, and maybe a tip might be like centering the experiences of the people in the surrounding communities, right? So getting direct quotes or experiences, because I think that oftentimes that's what's most salient, that's what hits home, right? Like if I think about like my own research, I talk a lot about different neighborhoods, but then I tag on there like the way it's constructed. So I'll say, like, for example, Black Creek, right, dubbed as Toronto's least livable neighborhood. And then I'll say another space, and like all the tags sends home the message in the ways in which Black neighborhoods are constructed, right, as negative or in need of intervention, and like it automatically gets people's attention.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Tamara, people are coming for you in the chat. They want you to bring the page back.
I'm gonna do it.
Let us know when you do. Thank you so much. We can go to our next question. Actually, that one is for you, Tamara. So what advice would you give regarding choosing the right area of specialization in your education and beyond?
Okay, in my journey, what definitely helped me were internships. Every year throughout my university, my bachelor's, that is, I did an internship. I interned at, well, you guys wouldn't know the exact organizations, but they were all framed in planning, policy, GIS, because I had decided that that is the area that I wanted to go into. What I did as well, I followed these pages on Instagram. So like, for example, if they had an event, I would show up. I would read what they were posting about. I would research it on my own to see, do I feel comfortable in this area? So I definitely believe my internships that cemented my choice in my specialization. What advice and beyond? Now that I am working in the field and I'm still kind of refining what I really want to do, because I do planning and the disaster risk management. I'm writing a thesis now on climate change adaptation. Now I'm in utilities. So I'm still kind of figuring out that path. So what I do now is that I reach out to people on LinkedIn, or even people that I just meet in my professional space, because sometimes my friends will say to me, "How you get to do that? How you get to do that?" And I'm like, "Just send a LinkedIn message," and they look at me like, "Send a LinkedIn message," and I'm like, "Yes, what's the worst that they could do?" I have made so many connections just via LinkedIn, people who I have never met before, who can explain. For example, I connected with a planner in Canada, and she was able to explain to me how planning in Canada works, the certifications, what you need to do, versus in Jamaica, you only need a bachelor's, or to go into planning, you don't necessarily need that certification. So having made that connection, I know now that if I intend to go to Canada, I need to get this certification. Understanding GIS from a different perspective as well, because some places, you have two sides of GIS. You have the user level, and then you have the back end. In some organizations, you will be required to know front end and back end, versus some organizations, you just need to know the front end. You have to ask. You're not gonna, you won't know unless you ask to say, okay, if I became a GIS technician at the Urban Development Corporation, what are the types of things are you expecting me to produce? Just maps for media consumption, or are you expecting me to create models, tools? Then I would have to know how to use Python, SQL, and all those things to build those specific tools for the organization. So I have moved from in my college years using internships, and now I use LinkedIn. And just when I meet people, and I'm a very shy person, to be honest. In person, I don't really like to talk, but at the same time, I recognize that silence is not going to help. So I reach out, I talk to people, I ask questions. Sometimes I will write down my questions beforehand to ensure that, I'm asking what needs to be asked. And then they can see that you are interested, and then they can put you on to somebody else, and then you refine it over time to say, okay, maybe GIS in water resources really isn't for, because I realize I'm not really into it that way. So how else can I apply it? So that is how I have done it over the years, and how I continue to do it. And it has worked for me. So I hope someone else can use that methodology and achieve the same results.
Those were great tips. So put yourself in uncomfortable places. Just do what you feel you have to do. I don't know, that question was for Tamara, but I don't know if anyone else would like to share something about that.
I will say I strongly recommend Tamara's approach because I've done it. The internships, fellowships, volunteering, if you have the time and the ability and the capacity to do it, Because I was at one point playing around with the idea of, oh, maybe go into GIS. I come to a realization I just need to know how it works. I don't want to do it for a living. Even when I was exploring, do I want to do a master's of planning? I start talking to planners and asking, but what exactly does your life look like on a day-to-day after graduation? Learn that, again, it's important information to know, don't want to do it. Same thing with environmental law. Interested, I don't need to, I just need to know how it works. Now it relates back to me. I don't need to do it. So honestly, part of that is just literally through, again, having different experiences, sometimes even going to professors saying, hey, I want to do this. Is there a way for you to, like, do you know someone who's looking for an RA in this particular role? And it takes a bit of bravery. I'm also not the most talkative person in the room. But it's just, yeah, just keep trying and be like, this is not for me, moving on. And just even the LinkedIn, I laugh because I think of a friend of mine who I think is actually on this call, when I'll say, just send them a message. The worst they can do is say no, or they just don't answer. You just move on to the next person. It's better than sitting down and saying, I wish I reached out to this person versus I tried, they didn't reach out. Okay, cool, let's go somewhere else. So yeah, I just say I echo and strongly recommend Tamira's approach because I've done it as well, and I'm still refining as I go. But I will say do the same. And research all the time.
Yes, I love that. Research, volunteering, internship, mentorship, all of that. So I'm just gonna drop that. Those are things that we're aiming to do as well at Black Eco Bloom. So make sure that we stay in touch so we can help you in that journey. Okay, so we're gonna go into our last question. And after that, well, I think we're going to have some time for maybe a few questions from the participant here. So that's really nice. So the last question is, what is your favorite piece of media? So that can be a podcast, song, music, movie that you would recommend to Black women and gender diverse people interested in or currently pursuing education in the environmental space. I don't want to put you on the spot, Arielle, but you do host a podcast, so.
Okay, so I don't know if that's even my favorite piece of media that I would recommend, but I am going to shamelessly plug it. So I host a podcast called The Joy Report. It's all about positive climate solutions through the lens of environmental justice and intersectionality, really focusing on the stories and lived experience and solutions driven by people who are historically excluded from the mainstream environmental movement. So that's one resource. But I would say I have probably 3 main book recommendations, and it really will be dependent on people's level of introduction or understanding for the topic. So I think the first one would be Hood Feminism by Mickey Hall. It's a book about kind of, I think the subtitle is stories from people that a movement forgot or something along those lines. And it's really just creating a narrative and a discourse surrounding it's an introduction to Black feminism, I think. And so that's one. I would say Ain't I a Woman by Bell Hooks is another really, it's very powerful. I think anything Bell Hooks writes is really powerful. But I think that one in particular, reading about the evolution of the Black woman experience, it makes today make a lot of sense. And it makes a commitment to environmentalism and to be rooted and grounded in earthwork really important, and just shows how valuable that work is. And then a book that I'm reading right now, or one that I've returned to often, is Eco-Womanism, African-American Women in Earth Honoring Faiths by Melanie Harris. She's one of the premier thought leaders in the eco-womanist space. I recently went to a retreat that she hosted for and grounded in eco-womanism, and it was probably one of the best experiences I've had all year. So yeah, those would probably be my 3 book recommendations for Black women and gender diverse folks interested in learning more about this space.
I can pop in with my recommendations. I would say anything by Dr. Catherine McKittrick. I think she's a great entry point into looking at geography and its intersections with race. She's a professor at Queen's University, and her research interest looks at Black studies, cultural geographies, the arts, and theories of race. I'm also a big fan of Dr. Christina Sharp and her text In the Wake, I believe it's called. Anything by her I love, anything by Saidiya Hartman. They do very similar work. Again, Shireen Razak, I mentioned Race, Space, and the Law. Shabazz, Rashad Shabazz, their text called Spatializing Blackness. Dr. Ronaldo Walcott, Black Like Who, and they talk about landscapes in Canada, and Clyde Woods. So any of those folks, I can also put that in the chat as well for you folks, but yes.
Yes, yes, please. You can put it in the chat. Tamara, please go ahead.
For me, I'll be honest, I don't read books a lot. So let me put that out there. And I am going to start, I've been taking note of the recommendations, and I'm going to read the books, because usually I would just browse a journal article. But my favorite source of it would be video content on YouTube. There's this channel called City Beautiful that I stalk his channel. Granted, it's from a North American perspective, but it allows me to view planning from a different country and how it is applied, those principles, the history of it. Also, I watch a lot of lectures on YouTube. I watch TED Talks. So I just look for a particular topic that is interesting to me. For example, if I feel like I want to explore statistics in geography, then I look up a lecture on statistics in geography. You know, I find that I grasp the information better when I'm in like a lecture setting, if that makes sense. So that is my means that I would share.
I think for me, I don't really have a particular book or movie. I think most of my content is honestly, my base is like, what do I don't know, and let me find it out. And sometimes that could be through a book. Sometimes it could be documentaries. So for me, sometimes it's just understanding what this context in this space is for me to understand how to operate in it. So depending what the question I'm looking for, it directs me of what I'm going to read or watch. And just helps me to understand a little bit of everything. Not to be, I always sometimes call it like being a specialized generalist in a way. But to me, documentaries, I think, allows me to really think as I'm watching how this relates to other content I might have read. But yeah, it really depends on what I'm looking for. Like, I'm a bit of a nerd, so it's a bit of what do I don't know, and let me figure it out.
Thank you so much. I mean, that's a very smart approach, right? So I love it. So I think we have time for maybe like one question or two. Let me see here. Okay, so let's say a question that was addressed to you all. So it was, would you change any part of your grad school path, career? What would you do differently? Or what advice you would give, very specific to you, what you went through? I love how you guys are all thinking like in different positions.
I could quickly speak to this. So I'm super shy. So my biggest thing, I think one thing I would change is maybe speaking out more, coming out of my shell a little bit more. Definitely during my master's program, I did my master's in education, and I was the youngest person in the program, and I was so intimidated. So I didn't form any connections whatsoever. I mean, with professors I did, but like not with my colleagues. And I think that I could have benefited from them if I had came out of my bubble a little bit more. So I would definitely redo that aspect of my experience, that like right off the top of my head. Maybe more will come later on, but that's my first thing, just stepping out a little bit more, connecting, networking more, and so forth.
Along those same lines, I think I think back on one very specific instance, and it reminds me that in undergrad, I wish I would have spoken up for myself more. I remember so vividly my sophomore year, I mean, my second semester of my freshman year at university, I was in environmental ethics class, and it was me, one other Black student, and the rest were white students in the course. And we were talking about animal cruelty in the food system. And we were required to read an article about how that was pretty much the same as like African like chattel slavery like in the United States, right? And like it was just making me bubble in like to my core, and I was just so infuriated and so hurt that this was like a whole like topic of discussion like for like a 2-hour class. But I just sat there, and I didn't feel like I had the words or like the support to be able to express how I was feeling. And I remember like writing a paper about it later about how wrong it was, and like the teacher getting so upset that I wrote it that he gave me a bad grade and I had to like appeal it. It was a whole thing. But like, I feel like if in the moment I would have been able to like speak up a little bit more and like speak my truth, and like, I don't know. I think that's something that I think about very often, and I wish I would have been able to be a better advocate for myself. Because one, like you're paying tuition, and so you are very much entitled to have a full and just a good educational experience that makes you feel safe. And so, yeah, like just putting yourself in the best position to honor yourself and honor the money and time that you're investing into this education to, to just like speak up for yourself more. But I would also say something that I'm glad I did was build relationships with faculty, especially in graduate school. Faculty just be knowing, they have lots of connections. And I think the best thing I did was just ask, like, how can I get more involved in this field? Do you know anyone who I can connect to? Do you have colleagues at other schools that I can maybe reach out to? And that was an incredibly beneficial experience for me. Also, just, I think a lot of people like figuring out a way to strike a balance between extracurriculars and academia. I think long-term, that will like be very beneficial if you're able to show that you did both. And like for me, like doing extracurricular work outside of my like law school curriculum is what kept me in law school, because I hated law school. And so I don't know, I think figuring out that balance for yourself is really important, but also setting boundaries.
For me, in terms of what I would have done differently, I think I had started in my bachelor's, I had started doing economics courses. And I don't know, I kind of taught myself out of it for whatever reason. And now in the professional world, I recognize the importance of marrying other social sciences. For example, with Beatrice, is what she's doing. You know, I recognize that I kind of missed out on that opportunity to add a little bit more flavor to how I present my knowledge, so that I can appeal to somebody who's only focused on the numbers, how important it is to marry these things together. Another instance of what I would have done differently would be in my master's program, where unfortunately I kind of had a bit of a falling out with a supervisor. But the truth is that red flags were there from day one, and I did not advocate for myself. I waited until it got too bad, where to the point where, you know, switching supervisors and all of that. So I think you should recognize when something is wrong and speak up for yourself, so that you don't have to spend any extra time in a program that you don't have to be, because it's not a fun place to be in. Where in Jamaica, we'd say your hand in a lion mouth, meaning that you are in a very precarious situation and you can't just pull your hand out of the lion mouth, because you can close it and bite off your hand at any time. So when you see something is going wrong, don't wait until it goes wrong. Stop it immediately and just redo what you need to do and move on. Yeah.
I think for me, it's not much I was changed from my undergrad experience. And I think part of that is because of the knowledge I was equipped with going in. But also, I think the first thing I remember going in my undergrad is trying to understand limitations. So how far can I change my program, and how far can I push? And because the program might be mapped out, I think initially I started off following that. Eventually I said, now I don't need to do this no more. So I think, and then I started to learn certain tips and tricks. I think that helped me by second, third year. And also kind of being okay that the program I applied to initially is not what I'm going to graduate in, and that's completely okay. There's always a saying that if you don't switch your program like once or twice, you're not doing it right, apparently. I don't know how true that is, but I think it's just giving myself grace, particularly I think I gave myself a bit grace, particularly first semester, first year. It would help reduce that stress. And I think also made me feel less anxious, and then also would then allow me to actually connect more with my peers. I think I did well with my peers within my classes. I did well connecting with faculty and staff and other students within different extracurriculars. But I think within my classes, I think having more of that during my undergrad would have been beneficial for my experience.
I love that. I can definitely relate to all of that. When you said to give you more grace in your first semester, that's a real one. That's a really good one.
First semester be rough.
Right? Right? Like you think you know what you're doing, you're putting all of this stress on your shoulders, but you don't have to. You really don't have to. Well, thank you so much for that. There's so many questions in the chat, guys. I can barely following. So someone asked, let me see here. That was Brienne. So she's saying, how do you guys find people to message on LinkedIn? And I guess you can put that on a like brother picture. It's how do you build relationship basically? On LinkedIn, maybe in person as well, because a lot of you talk about like building a relationship when you were at school is something that you would have loved to do more. So if you have any tricks on that.
For me, I go to my search bar and I go GIS professional, urban planning professional, disaster risk management professional, and then I look at well, to be honest, race does play a role in it, because I have found, and I don't mean to sound bad, but sometimes I found that from people from a different race tend to be unwilling to connect sometimes, but still send it, you never know. But I do that, and sometimes send a little message too. Don't just sometimes, for example, if I'm gonna connect with somebody that's all the way in South Africa, they're gonna be like, who are you? Where did you come from? How did you find me? So sometimes you have to send a little message to say, okay, my name is Tamira Little. I'm in the planning and GIS space. I look at your profile, I notice that you're doing a lot of things in the field, and I want to follow you to see if I can pick up any tips and tricks to improve my career. And that goes a far way, trust me. So do it like that. So use up that search bar, put in those key terms, and don't be afraid to introduce yourself.
Yeah, similarly, when I was doing the job search during law school, I looked up like the biggest law firms or the biggest environmental organizations, and I searched through their like photo directories to find other Black women. And that was the first place that I looked, and I reached out with a very similar message of, hi, I'm pursuing a career in your field. What you do seems very aligned with what I would like to do with my career. One, is there a way that we can connect? But two, would you be interested in having like a few minute conversation so I can learn about your career trajectory? And, very similar to when you're asking people to like talk about their research and their literature, they're generally pretty willing to talk about what has brought them to the point that they're at right now, especially with young people who are actively like pursuing this field.
I think something, just to quickly jump in, I'm thinking of a mentor call I've had where sometimes when we reach out to folks, we're always thinking of reaching out to the person who's a director or VP or manager. But something that they mentioned is it's important to mentor horizontally much as it is vertically. So people who are literally in the same boat as you, or might be just a little bit ahead, or even people who are younger. So it's not even by age or by title. Just going with that open mind, everyone has something information that you provide that you may not know. And just, talk to people who within the same level as you, and because you don't know, and also just following back up saying, hey, how has it been like past 3 months? Let's catch up. Because I think that's part of just relationship building itself. It's just more of, instead of just, hey, can I just take your information and I'm gone? It's more of, okay, cool, here's what I did with it. Can I follow up with you like a quick 15-minute chat? Or is there anything that I can do in return to help you out? You'd be surprised of other folks who be like, oh yeah, sure, like, do you know this? And that alone creates that relationship and that's less transactional based. Because you're just, I'll talk, now it's just like a person that you're knowing who holds this knowledge, but also that, you just catch up and say, again, down later in the line, you're looking for a job. You can be saying, hey, I'm looking for this particular role. Do you know of anyone? Or if someone's telling me like, I'm tired of my job, I also mentally know like if I'm seeing something to pass it along their way, to be like, hey, I saw this, are you interested? I think that's one way about when it comes to any type of relationship, is just knowing what you're in it for. But not just to be like, can I get from you? Okay, I'm gone, I'm bye. So
Thank you so much. There was a lot of information sharing tonight, guys. This was amazing. I think that's all the time that we have for the questions. I also want to be mindful of everyone's time. So I know time's flying, Tanisha, I agree. That was such a fun chat. I don't even have the words, guys, to thank you for being here. You were so generous with the information that you shared, all of the tools, resources, that was really amazing. So thank you so much. I mean, if you guys enjoyed the chat, just drop an emoji for our panelists. That was amazing. Just a bit of love for them. Well, thank you. I see Tiana jump in here. Do you want to say something? Tiana, by the way, is also the co-founder of Black Eco Bloom. So Tiana, I don't know if you want to say, spread some love.
Oh my God, I just wanted to say thank you so much. There were so many moments in the panel that I just wanted to scream and be like, yes, yes, yes. Like maybe if you saw my exclamation points. I think that like a lot of the things that I heard are things that I do as well, or like things that I would love to like implement. Like I'm pretty sure I've connected with a few of our panelists through LinkedIn. Like that's how I got to know some of you. So I'm really happy that this space exists. And I think when we were cultivating BEB, like this is exactly what we wanted. And so it's just very beautiful that we're able to like come together and like learn from each other and support each other. So I'm just really happy, and I just want to say thank you. And thank you to everyone that came and supported us. It's really amazing.
Thank you, Tiana. I also want to give a big shout out to our volunteers who are like helping us putting this together. I'm thinking of Samantha, I'm thinking of Rima, I'm thinking of Chanel, who really worked hard for this event to happen, and their support was necessary to be able to do this. So thank you so much to the team. Thank you so much, guys, again. Is there any words for the end? I feel like that's it for me.
Well, I think this was an amazing sit down, as I have learned, and I know a lot of the participants have learned as well. I'm once again so thankful that you guys start to include me in this, because I was fretting that, oh my God, I'm all the way in Jamaica. How can I help someone? And the truth is that, I know I have shared something and I have learned so much. So I'm just really happy for this event, and I'm looking forward to the rest of them, honestly.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you for tuning in tonight. That's it. Oh, by the way, for those who are still there is like 2 other sessions coming. So if you connect with us, so I think Samantha is gonna drop our links. If you connect with us, you can stay in touch with us and we'll be able to share our 2 other sessions. So there's gonna be one on economic mobility and the next one will be on employment. So stay tuned. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you again.
All right, bye guys.
nice.